Imagine you're walking through one of London's poorest neighborhoods. In October of 1814, it's just another afternoon. People are at home, children are playing in the streets, and workers are finishing up their day. Nobody has any idea that within a few minutes, a disaster, unlike anything they've ever seen, is about to hit them. Not a fire, not a storm, not a riot, a wave of beer. At the center of the story was a massive brewery in London known as Moe & Co. The brewery produced porter, a dark beer that was incredibly popular at the time. To keep up with demand, they stored huge amounts of beer in gigantic wooden vats. These weren't ordinary barrels. Some stood several stories tall and held hundreds of thousands of gallons of liquid. They looked more like small buildings than containers. On October 17th, one of the brewery workers noticed that an iron hoop wrapped around one of the giant vats had broken. While that might sound alarming today, it wasn't considered a major problem. Similar issues had happened before, and nothing disastrous had come from them. So the brewery continued operating as usual. About an hour later, everything changed. Without warning, the damaged vat suddenly burst. The force was incredible. Thousands upon thousands of gallons of beer exploded outward, creating a chain reaction that caused nearby vats to fail as well. In a matter of seconds, an enormous amount of beer was released into the brewery. The pressure was so intense that parts of the building were destroyed instantly. Walls collapsed, debris flew through the air. Workers barely had time to react. But the brewery itself wasn't the only thing in danger. Outside its walls sat the crowded neighborhood of Street Giles. A massive wave of beer rushed out of the brewery and into the surrounding streets. Witnesses described a wall of liquid tearing through the area. Houses were smashed, buildings collapsed. People were caught completely off guard. Think about that for a second. Imagine sitting inside your home when suddenly a flood crashes through the wall. Not water, not sewage, beer. The neighborhood around the brewery was densely populated, and many buildings were poorly constructed. They simply couldn't withstand the force. Several homes were destroyed almost immediately. Families found themselves trapped beneath rubble as the flood swept through narrow streets and alleyways. In total, 8 people lost their lives as a result of the disaster. Some were crushed by collapsing structures. Others were caught in the flood itself. Among the victims were women and children who had no warning and nowhere to run. News of the strange catastrophe spread rapidly throughout London. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. A deadly beer flood sounded more like a joke than a real event. Yet it had happened, and the damage was impossible to ignore. As word spread, crowds gathered around the scene. Curiosity pulled people toward the destruction. Many wanted to see the aftermath with their own eyes. Stories quickly began circulating throughout the city. Some accounts were exaggerated, while others were surprisingly accurate. Like many unusual disasters in history, facts and rumors became mixed together almost immediately. One persistent story claimed that locals rushed into the streets with buckets and containers to collect as much beer as they could. It's the kind of detail that sounds believable because, honestly, people probably would do something like that. However, historians debate how much of that story is true and how much was added later as the event became part of local legend. What isn't debated is the scale of the destruction. The flood caused significant damage and left parts of the neighborhood devastated. For the victims and their families, there was nothing funny about what had happened. An investigation was eventually launched to determine who was responsible. After examining the incident, authorities concluded that it had been a tragic accident rather than negligence or criminal wrongdoing. The brewery wasn't held legally responsible for the deaths. In fact, the company was able to recover financially and continue operating. That outcome might seem surprising today. In the modern world, a disaster causing multiple deaths would almost certainly lead to lawsuits, fines, and years of legal battles. But early 19th century London operated very differently. Over time, the London beer flood faded into history. It was overshadowed by wars, political events, technological advancements, and countless other stories competing for attention. Yet more than 200 years later, it remains one of the strangest disasters ever recorded.